Welcome, dear listeners, to another insightful episode of We Are Listening. I'm your host, Pulkit Garg, and today's conversation is one that holds profound significance in our fast paced and modern day lives. And our esteemed guest is not only a seasoned psychologist, but a passionate advocate for mental health, specializing in adolescents and young adults. With a triple majors degree and a master's in psychology, she brings a wealth of knowledge to our discussion, and her work is not confined to clinical practice. She is actively engaged with organizations like Sukh and Soha Space and runs a private practice under the banner of WeHumanize.co. When not delving into intricacies of the mind, you can find her exploring the world or nestled with her books, movies, and of course, some delightful K dramas. Welcome, Achal, to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Pulkit. I'm really looking forward to being here.
No, the pleasure is all ours, Anchal. And before we dive into our discussion, that's going to be guided by a lot of questions and statistics. Why don't you share about your journey to getting into the place where you are being the advocate for mental health?
So, funny story. Me being in psychology was an accident. So, as a child, I've suffered my own set of concerns and I've not gotten the right help. But yes, so which is why I was very curious about this, but never really thought about it as pursuing this. So I wrote NIFT. I did not get into NIFT. So I was like, ठीक है अब एक साल के लिए कुछ भी कर लो, कोई भी कॉलेज में घुस जाओ, start preparing for NIFT again and write NIFT. And that कुछ भी happened to be psychology. And that's when I realized that, okay, you know what, listen, I think I want to stay here and explore this more because I'm feeling connected here. And if at least the kind of person that I would have wanted back then as a child, if I'm able to be that person to someone, I think my purpose is served. That's it. I think which is why I'm here and which is how I've gotten to be here. Started off as an accident, but I'm really happy to do what I'm doing.
That's amazing, Achal. That's amazing. And that was really a candid answer coming out. And today, I was going through a LinkedIn post which talked about being authentic out there. And in all your endeavors and all the skins that we as individuals and humans wear. And this gets me to my very first question. We live in a era where the line between idealism and realism is really blurred, and at the same time there are a lot of facades that we wear as individuals. We have to play different roles. A boy or a man would be playing the role of a father, husband, brother, and similarly for a woman as well, being a wife, mother, sister. Yes, you have to play those different roles, but with the current scenarios, I have seen people changing personalities completely as well in their different roles. So, what are your thoughts on this? Where do you stand on this point?
So I think firstly, if we start off with just idealism and realism, right? It is something that has been inculcated since childhood of ours. We've often been asked this question, who is that person do you idolize? We've asked to write essays about it and all of it. Not realizing that the idolization of that person is happening so strong that we end up wanting to become that person, and which is a good motivation. But what we also tend to do is negate realistic factors, and that can be like a downward slope for yourself. So, for example, probably say there is a particular psychologist that I idolize who's been in the field for like multiple years, right?
Hmm.
And probably they see like 200 new clients in a year, which is not sensible to the number that I'm saying. But
Yes.
like, but now at this stage of my practice, if I say that, okay, at the end of 2024, I need to see 200 new clients, that's practically not possible. But then it is an idealized goal that I've set for myself. Realistically, what the goal can be is, okay, I would want to work to my best capacity and not put myself into like a caged number. Because what happens is if I don't keep up to that idealized goal that I've put on myself,
Hmm.
it's another way to beat myself up for it. Like, listen, you put yourself a goal and you are not able to keep up with it. So you are not a nice person. You are not capacitated for it.
This brings me to my next question. When you talk about idealism and being a real self, we are surrounded by a lot of social media channels all around us: Facebook, Instagram, and the list just goes on. LinkedIn, Twitter, now being called X. So actually, this brings me to a point where it's a confusing state for me as well, where one of the management gurus, the leading gurus, Peter Drucker, says that what gets measured gets managed or gets achieved. And we have heard different variations of it, but the idea is what gets measured. Now we are talking about the mental health for today's generation, including myself. I'm going to be very candid on this, including myself. There are times where we are just in a haste to get those social media likes, comments, shares on a post that we are making, and if we don't get the desired numbers, we start to feel anxious, we start to get overwhelmed. What are your thoughts around this? How does it really fit into the actual thing of being measuring it out to achieve the goals?
Correct. Again, I don't want to be like a sant person and say that, see, all of this is wrong. You should just keep yourself detached to the numbers and all of it. Because I also fall into that.
Mhm,
I also
mhm.
run a work Instagram, and the numbers, the followers, number, the likes, the views that I get on my reels and all of it really matters. And at the end of the day, it feels like that is something that is defining our quality and defining us as a person. And which is where I feel we end up losing ourselves. Again, I think this can be very subjective to personal experience of different people, but
Mhm.
I think it can be very losing, as in now, because a certain way of expression is accepted on social media, and in order to be accepted on that social media, you would adapt that certain way and be that certain way, irrespective of what your authentic self is. And I think it solely comes from the place of how much value. It's that number, like 1 to 10 scale grade पे. Like a higher number talks about how good I am.
Yep, yep.
A lower number talks about maybe, okay, I'm not good or my quality is not that good.
But somewhere or the other, I personally believe that the number of likes or shares doesn't really isn't really a measure of the quality of content or the emotions that you're letting out on social media. So somewhere or the other, the need and the urge to have those numbers being visible to our own self needs to be managed somewhere, because it has led to a place where even at times I'm just continuously refreshing to see if there is any new like or new comment coming in, and that's what I believe is somewhere a bit harmful to our overall daily schedule, because we end up procrastinating. We just are sitting and just scrolling down a screen, pulling it down to get the new numbers or new notifications. I did read Neer Ayal talking about this as one of the main triggers in his four quadrant approach to hooking a new customer onto your platform. And that's where all these social media platforms work around. With the we have just come out of a phase where last 3 years, 3.5 years were, under the fear of COVID, and that's where our intake of social media also drastically increased. I even saw my screen time increasing like beyond 20% in comparison to the last 4 years, 2016, 2020, and then 2020 to 2024. Do you believe that while the awareness during COVID about mental health issues has increased, the acceptance is still a challenge out there?
Correct. I think yes, it is, because obviously with increased number of social media awareness and people talking about it everywhere, because also like more than mental health being an awareness sort of thing, it's also become like a fashion trend as to how people use it. So yes, there is increased awareness. There are more people talking about it, but then when it comes to probably application, or probably yourself going to therapy or seeking help, or like sending your family member to therapy or some sort of testing or something like that, things would get a little questionable. Like,
Mhm.
are you sure you want to do that? We can try and figure out what this is. We don't have to go to that step. So yes, there is awareness, people are talking about it. There is a lot of stimulated and unfed conversation. By unfed, I'm also meaning conversation which is just there, which is not particularly clearly verified. Also, Google is giving plethora of information, which also cannot necessarily be all true. So yes, there is awareness, but when it comes to acceptance, there is difficulty in acceptance also, and that's stemming from my belief, at least in India, being the cultural backgrounds we come from, the social backgrounds we come from, the stigma, that the taboo that revolves around it being the reason.
Totally, totally. I have seen the usage. I don't have the exact numbers with me on this, but I have seen the increase in usage of the terms like depression, anxiety, stress, burnouts coming into picture. But somewhere or the other, I believe people really don't understand the real meaning of these, terminologies. They are just in a race to label things out or find some facades to hide behind. With all due respect to people actually going through these issues. So, how can one really differentiate between realizing that yes, you have a mental health issue to that needs some focus and that needs to be catered to, a guilt trip, and a actual burnout happening over there where you require the rest?
Firstly, it's not in one's hand to be able to decide if they are having some mental health concern or like a disorder or something, because
Mhm.
again, there is a difference between a mental health disorder and a mental health concern or an issue.
Mhm.
uh, an issue can just be some emotional turmoil that I'm going through a rough patch in life and I'm not able to cope with it. Now, mental health disorder can be like a proper depression, anxiety disorder, or a borderline personality disorder, and things like that. With a lot of these terms being used again as jargons and also as trend, they end up losing their meaning. And the only way for one person to find out if they are allowed to use that label is to get themselves clinically tested. I, as a counseling psychologist, also cannot clearly use that label until diagnosed, and I cannot give the diagnosis. A clinical psychologist does that. I do have clients come in my sessions. I'm like, do you think I have depression? Do you think I have anxiety? Or you know what, I think I have ADHD, and I'm because I'm not able to concentrate on all of it. My only response to them is, okay, maybe that might be the reality, but I would want to stop there and take away that label. It can be used as an excuse for doing whatever you're doing, A, which can be harmful, or B, in a positive way, it can also be used to justify that, okay, listen, now I understand why I'm behaving the way I'm behaving. But for all of this, a clinical diagnosis is needed. So someone comes up and say that, you know what, I feel like I'm very depressed, I'm in depression. I stop there and I'm like, okay, what is depression? It's extreme feelings of sadness. So we'll just call it extreme feelings of sadness and not use the word depression until we clinically diagnose it, right?
Yeah.
And at needed stages, we do refer them to like needed people. Like, okay, listen, now I feel that we should get the diagnosis done. And we do get that so that it's easier for us to understand that, okay, now there's a label which justifies like whatever you're doing and whatever you're saying, however you're behaving. It makes sense.
Achal, in the interest of our listeners, I would request you, if you can really break down and remove that complexity around certain terminologies that we hear in the mental health industry. And I'm coming from a place specifically from the people providing the services as mental health practitioners. So, as if we look at the overarching mental health practitioners as a category, we have got psychologists coming into picture, we have got psychiatrists coming into picture, we've got psychotherapists coming into picture, and then we have life coaches coming into picture nowadays. And I'm sure there are multiple more things coming to picture. Like you, even right now, just during the conversation, you mentioned about counseling psychologist and clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
How can me as a layman, really differentiate and identify whom should I be going for if I find some early symptoms of mental health issues in my life?
Right. I'll start off with the basic as to like the the label, the term that I use for myself, which is a counseling psychologist. As a counseling psychologist, we get into therapeutic modalities. It's majorly talk therapy, and we deal with emotional concerns, social concerns, and things like that. We don't deal with disorders. We don't deal with borderline personality disorder, or we don't deal with schizophrenia, we don't
Mhm.
deal with bipolar disorder. If it comes to that, a person who diagnoses all of these mental health disorders is a clinical psychologist,
Okay.
because they have the right to test and give a label to all of this. And they work with them. They work with clinical psychologists. There
Mhm.
are times that often clinical psychologists or psychiatrists need to collaborate with a counseling psychologist, and that's where it can be co-therapeutic. But majorly, as a counseling psychologist, dealing with disorders is not our forte. And when it comes to psychiatrists, these are the people who are with their highest education in this field, with MPhil and with PsyD and all of it. And they are also the ones who can prescribe medicines. So that's like a proper medical thing. Medicines for depression, antidepressants, or like medicines for schizophrenia, or these other disorders that come into play,
Mhm.
they can give medicines. Psychotherapists also you would mention, and psychotherapists are those people who specialize in particular therapies and use that therapy as their modality
Okay.
in the therapy session.
Mhm. Mhm.
Again, I think between psychotherapist and psychologist, there is a lot of blurred line as to who exactly is what, because again, the advisory body in India has not clearly defined this. It's still a little here and there and questionable. But does that answer?
Yeah, yeah, surely, surely. And if you can also, touch a bit upon the life coaches part. Who are life coaches and who are the people who should be going to life coaches?
Correct. Again, I'm not clearly sure who exactly is a life coach, but again, something that I've heard of and something that I've read about is life coaches are those people who help them get better in life, very solution focused, and
Mhm.
very immediate basis as to like what you can do right now in your
Mhm.
life, what changes can you make in your life so that your life gets better, right?
Mhm.
Maybe like different things, behaviors, realizations, relationships, social, and all of it. How
Mhm.
is it different from therapy, or at least the kind of therapy that I do as a practitioner?
Mhm.
Is life coaching is a short term thing, is what I've heard. Again, I might be wrong. Is a short term thing, and it's very solution focused. But in therapy, what I do is I get into a long term relationship, and I don't particularly focus on giving solution and getting rid of the problem immediately, but try to understand where the problem is stemming from, get to the root, and deal with that root.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
That is something what life coaches don't do.